Hi guys, I'm Woodcraft Hamster and I thought I'd do another quick carving tips video for you today. And what I want to talk about is drying out green woodworking projects. Now unfortunately I haven't done any green wood carving for the last few weeks, so I've got nothing in the workshop to demonstrate with, but what I have got is this, which is just a little spoon blank that I made up a while ago. Now this is fully dried, but for the purpose of this video I just want you to imagine that this is still green wood basically. Now the first thing I want to mention is that when you're carving, now you can either sort of finish everything all in one session. Quite often, certainly for me, I tend to find I'll do 2 or 3 sessions if not more. So what we're trying to do is prevent this from splitting or checking in the meantime. Now the big problem with carving with green wood, as lovely as that is to do because it's very easy to carve, it's very fluid, it's much nicer to carve than dry wood, but it does increase the risk of it cracking. And the reason is it's full of moisture, and that moisture as it dries out is trying to escape, and it will push its way through the wood, and by doing that it can sometimes force an opening and crack it. So the first point I wanted to make is that this little blank here, hopefully you can see fairly well on the camera, is all generally the same thickness. Now that is a really good start for preventing cracking. The reason being is that if I had left a large chunk where the bowl is here, let's say I finished the handle first, that's the first part I made, and I thought, oh, I'll come back and do the handle, do the bowl later, and left a big chunk of wood here so I could do that. There would be more moisture in this than there would be in the handle, and therefore that's trying to force its way out, and potentially that would cause it to crack. So it's quite important wherever you can is to try and keep everything in a uniform thickness. Hasn't got to be precise, it can be quite rough, such as this, but it is very useful to try and do that. So that was sort of the first point. Now moving on from that, let's say you've managed to keep everything generally kind of the same thickness. You've finished part of your spoon, or even you've got down to this point here in one session. What you don't want to do is just leave this sitting around and let it dry, because it generally, in my experience, will crack. So there's a couple of things you can do to try and prevent that. Now again, as I say, I've got no green wood around, so I've just taken some old dry shavings as an example, and I'll mention something about that in a moment. And what I tend to do, there's 2 ways of doing this. You can either take a plastic bag. Doesn't have to be a particularly big one like this. It can just be a stand. I mean, this is one of these sort of bag for life strong things. I tend to use these because I have them hanging around. You can use a standard sort of carrier bag, the more flimsy kind. Makes no difference. And what you want to do is take the chips and the shavings from what you've been carving, so they will still be damp. They still have moisture in them. Throw them in the bag. Normally 1 to 2 handfuls I find is generally fine. Take your piece of carving, put it in there on top of the shavings, and don't completely close the bag. Don't leave it as open as this, but don't completely close it up. What you want to do is generally fold it down, leave a couple of little bits there, just so that the air can come in and out. And I tend to find, if I've got a little offcut or something like that, I'll just put that on the top to stop the bag from reopening, but there are a couple of gaps in here which hopefully you can see. And what this is doing is slowing down the drying process. So basically the moisture in the wood chippings and the moisture that's in your piece of work are trapped inside the bag to a degree. This is why you need to leave an air gap, because you do need that moisture to escape, otherwise the wood will just start to rot. And essentially that will slow down that drying process with a little bit of luck, enough that the wood won't crack. You can also do this with a cardboard box. It's not something I often do because you tend to find that the cardboard ends up getting a little bit soggy. But basically you can throw your shavings and your piece of work into a cardboard box, punch some holes in the top to allow a bit of airflow, and it does exactly the same thing. So essentially those are my 2 little tips for trying to prevent things from cracking. The other point I really should make at this point is, if you can avoid it, don't take your piece of work indoors. It's okay to do the actual carving indoors, that's absolutely fine. But you tend to find that modern homes and the temperature at which we keep our houses and flats and whatever nowadays will make the wood dry out far too quickly. Even in a carrier bag like this, I tend to find more often than not that wood will crack. So if you can leave it out in a garden, a shed, a garage, even if you just put it out maybe on your front doorstep, you will be dramatically increasing the risk of it not cracking by it being at a sort of a more outside temperature. Now obviously during the summertime this is more difficult, especially if you live in an area where it gets quite hot, but again that's kind of the risk you take doing green wood carving. But really those were just my couple of tips for trying to prevent things from cracking, especially new wood carvers. You know, there's nothing worse than spending a load of time and effort and actually coming out with something that you quite like, only to come back a couple of days later and find that it's snapped in half, or it's got a crack running along it or something like that. So anyway guys, I hope it was useful. Comments and questions in the box below. Hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I hope you'll all join me next time. Thanks guys.